and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy. And while the demons travelled down the Princess Highway in the driving rain straight into the belly of the beast in order to slay a nemesis and end their season in their own den, this hovel has been the battleground of both one of our biggest defeats as well as one of our greatest victories. But this battle was neither, and the D's blew their chance to put their enemy to the sword and instead put a dent in their own chances of claiming the ultimate treasure. Joining me tonight to lament on a match that might have been lost at the selection table and perhaps tactically is George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Binman. Good evening, Demon listeners. Speaking of defeats of large numbers, at least following this week's round of matches, Binman has absolutely incontrovertible evidence that the West Coast Eagles are loading.
Yeah, they've been loading for a long time.
Well, they've certainly been...
that's a whole nother conversation, isn't it?
They've certainly been loading up on their salaries, because I had a look at there was a release sort of the Rich 100 list of AFL players, and they've got a lot of players that are being paid at top dollar. So you would expect them to be playing a little bit better, but I think some of those players are injured, so yeah, that doesn't help. Also joining us tonight to bring us back to the light and reaffirm that not all is lost is Binman. Good evening, Binman.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And the great thing about, and this is being sarcastic, about that huge thumping that West Coast got was the graphic that I saw. Someone asked me straight away, when I was at a mate's party, and they asked, when was the last time a team got beaten by that much? And I said, well, I tell you, I think it was Melbourne, maybe Fitzroy, maybe it was the Roos, I reckon end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s or something. And then today I saw a graphic with the table, and we're number 1 and number 2 on that list. And the Roos, I think, or Fitzroy flogged us by something. And then, of course, Geelong, which I completely blacked out when I was asked that question, the infamous 186 game. So, those dark days seem very dark as the room that you're in there, George. It looks very gloomy in your room there.
It's called ambience. My wife controls the lighting.
What's in this day and age in footy, those massive records are going to be very hard to beat. But I think working in our favour, and hopefully it comes to pass, there's a good possibility Brisbane are playing West Coast. I'm not sure if it's next week or within the next couple of weeks. They're playing them at the Gabba. Now, let's hope that Brisbane don't decide to manage a few players and they go for the record, because that could be broken the way West Coast are playing at the moment.
It's a bigger discussion, isn't it? But it's a really big question for the competition when percentage becomes so critical. I mean, at the end of the day, there'll be 5 or 6 teams battling it out for 8th, 7th and 8th spot at the end of the season. And if you happen to be lucky enough to get West Coast twice, firstly, and the second time if you get to play them from any point in this season on, I mean, that's really, it's only their financial strength that could keep them afloat, you'd reckon, with that sort of shellacking. That's a shocker. Now, speaking of loading, it's heating up again on Demonland, the emotion of loading, and I do my best to stay out of it. But on the loading front, I loaded up on the punt this weekend using my theories and did quite nicely, thank you. No losses, all wins, gravy train, post-bye, factoring in of the writing down of the Lions loss and the Freos loss and the Suns loss last week. How to make money and influence people.
Well, we don't want to hear you benefiting from our club's failures, man.
No, I didn't bet anything on the Melbourne game, but I did say that the odds were about right. I thought I don't bet against Melbourne, but I didn't back Melbourne. That's 100% sure. But if we want to look at it a positive way, one of the teams that is helped by Geelong, the situation made worse for by Geelong winning is Freo. So at least that's a positive. It keeps them above Freo.
Each week, I ask loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or on your preferred podcasting app. We love the feedback. We'll read them out on the show. 5 stars absolutely help boost the podcast and get more people listening. Jarek writes, demolish a cold pie, best by a mile. Not the entitled boys club full of in-jokes and personal palaver. Solid, clear insight and rational analysis. I savour this each week at a time. I can devour it all uninterrupted. Delicious pod. Thanks to all. Well, thanks, Jarek. Much appreciated. Wadger the First writes, good stuff. Binman, Andy and George, the good, the bad and the ugly, or perhaps more accurately, the optimist, the pessimist and the realist. In short, balanced and informative. What more can a tragic demon devotee ask for? Good stuff. Now, I recognise that handle. Wadger is a Demonlander, so I'll forgive him for calling me bad and a pessimist, and I guess for calling George ugly. Thanks, Wadger. I love the feedback. You'll probably bear the full brunt of my pessimism tonight, so hopefully it does get balanced out by the optimist and the realist here. Jono writes, thanks for the great balanced discussion on all things demonic. I look forward to the podcast every week, in and out of season. Easy listening and informative. Well, thank you, Jono, for that great balanced review. Keep the feedback coming, guys. Please give us the 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and please don't forget to click the link, the write a review link, and leave us a positive review. In addition to the 5 stars, they're separate. I don't know why they're not just together, and we'll read them out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. If you want to chat with other Demon fans and you've never been to Demonland, well, head on over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show, there are multiple topics and threads on a variety of things, but all Demons related usually. So join up to join in on the conversation. I assure you it's far superior to anything you'll read on any social media platform. If you would like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute. I'll bring you on when we can, usually when there's a bit of a break in the discussion. So just wait patiently. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message. We'll play it on the show. If you're listening to us live right now at the moment, you can join our chat rooms by simply heading on over to demonland.com/podcasts. We'll be back live on Monday next week. So if you want to listen to us live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Well, let's get straight into the match wrap-up. In an out-of-the-box move, the Demons treated Thursday night's match as an interstate game, heading to Geelong a day early to get a feel of that skinny Cardinia Park dimension. I thought this was a revolutionary move, and I was hoping that our selections would also prove to be equally unconventional, and they were, but for all the wrong reasons, in my opinion. The Demons decided to reward Adam Tomlinson's fantastic King's Birthday performance by shunting him back to Casey. And in an equally unorthodox move, the Demons once again decided to play the wet, slippery conditions like a pre-season training run in the high summer in February. Handballs were the order of the night, with the Demons amassing 53 more handballs than their opponents when the game, and yours truly was screaming out to just kick the bloody thing. We've played 3 matches in the wet, slippery conditions, 4 if you count the slick deck at the Gabba, and we've not really learned how to play these conditions in deference to our style that would absolutely work on a dry day at the G. George, you accurately noted in your match report that 3 of Geelong's 6 final quarter goals all started from kicks off the ground further up the field. Now, I will concede that we did play some of our best footy on the night in the driving rain, but the overuse of the ball, even in periods where we dominated the contest, seemed to cost us some opportunities, and we did turn the ball over a fair bit. We missed a golden opportunity after the horrific Cameron clash that saw the star forward subbed out of the game to swing Harry Petty forward, and it was too little too late when he was finally moved. Geelong defender Tom Stewart had already taken some critical intercept marks, and we were too slow in implementing a change to nullify one of the best interceptors in the game. At the end of the day, it was just another insipid last quarter in the wet, and it cost us another match. We were beaten in the air. We were smashed at the contested ball. And until the final few minutes, we couldn't effectively hit the scoreboard. Now, our chances for a top 2 berth are probably out of our reach. A top 4 could slip from our grasp if we don't play 4 quarters of footy more regularly. Big man, give me some positivity from the game.
Well, Look, I mean, as I said, it panned out how I thought.
Yep.
As I said before we came on, it panned out how I thought it would. It doesn't, just like the Collingwood win the previous week, it doesn't change my confidence about winning the flag at all. I said how I'd price the market last week, with us being, if I was to do a market with us being $5 favourite and Pies $5.50, maybe $6. And I wouldn't have changed. I won't change that at all on the back of that, for all of the same reasons that I've been talking about for 2 or 3 weeks. In my mind, there were a number of factors at play, and there's a really interesting voicemail coming up, Andy, that we'll speak to later. So I won't I'll make the points then. But for me, that the biggest factor was the fatigue from a heavy block of training. I mean, it was clear in just watching the game that we ran out of puff. So I'm sure I'll touch on that a fair bit as we move forward. So, I actually thought it was a terrific effort. I thought their effort all night was brilliant. When I talk to the stats in a sec, you'll see the pressure ratings was really, really high until the drop off in the last. I was really, really impressed by their effort all game, their preparedness to get in. And even in the last quarter, I thought it was, a really impressive effort not to get blown out in that game. I mean, I've talked about Freo's performance and why, and used Freo's performance against the Giants as a non-emotive example of the impact of fatigue, which is one of the reasons I loaded up on Freo in the thingo, because they were always going to bounce back. And if you watch Freo playing Essendon last night, you would have seen a completely different football team. And so, that was for me the biggest factor. Freo got blown out by the Giants. Lions got blown out by the Lions post-bye. Most teams are getting smashed, even by team way down the ladder post-bye. We held tough. Our pressure rating dropped to 163 in the last after being 214 in the third quarter. We stuck tough and ended up getting beaten by 15 points. I thought it was an absolutely huge effort in the last quarter. So, I mean, I guess I have a different perspective on measuring, it was a really, really frustrating loss. I think the umpires were definitely a factor. I'm not normally one to blame the umpires, but I want to talk about that a bit later. I think that was definitely a factor. It was enormously frustrating to watch and to lose. But as we talked about last week, it panned out exactly as I thought it would. A tough winter's night game that was a physical, hard slog, and that we would struggle to win.
George, anything you want to add?
I don't think the fatigue was as much a factor in this game, because Selwyn has said that the loading that will occur over this period will occur over a 3-week period. So they're not as being as punished as much on the track as what they were if they had a proper bye. But I took a lot of interest in Stephen May's comments after the match, where he said, unfortunately, we didn't get any scoreboard nourishment. We were unable to get the lead. So for all the work that they were doing, there was nothing coming from the other end of the ground. It wasn't that the defenders were trying their hardest, but really using the opportunities that we had up forward didn't help us whatsoever. He also said the full field goals, which included 3 of those, at least 3 in the last quarter, and probably 5 of the last quarter goals, not normally allowed by the team. Simple as that. The Geelong were playing, we'll talk about this later, Geelong were playing wet weather football for 3 of the 4 quarters in that game, and we were not playing wet weather football. We'll talk about those components, but they were gaining full advantage from just kicking the ball off the ground, kicking it long, kicking it instead of handballing, and we were turning it over at critical points, particularly in the forward line. So we were getting nothing from our forward thrusts, and they were taking full advantage of it. So at the end of the day, it was a 15-point win, but it could easily, with adjustments, have been a win for us, and probably should have been.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the stats in a second, but I mean, for me, I take your point, but for me, those things are related to fatigue. That their ability to transfer the ball from the back half was an ability of our inability to spread and cover them. I mean, it was obvious we ran out of legs, just as it was obvious the previous week when the Cats played Port They were 20 points up halfway through the second quarter, went to halftime at 5 points up. And then after half-time, got completely spifflicated by Port and just completely ran out of gas in the last quarter. All of the numbers are almost a mirror of our numbers, including the pressure rating drop-off, including the drop-off in contested possessions, including allowing goals from the back half, almost an exact mirror of our stats in the last quarter of this game. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, but for me, it was the most significant factor. Not, of course, not the only factor, but there's no question that for whatever the reason was, whatever the cause of the fatigue, we didn't have gas in the tank at the end of that game, and they did. And keeping in mind, they were a team that ran out of gas. And with the other thing about us, we're the best fourth quarter team in the AFL. We still are. So forget Collingwood. We have got the best record in the last quarter of any team in the AFL. For us to run out of gas, we haven't been doing it all season, except for the last 2 or 3 weeks. Geelong have been struggling in the last quarter, hugely. And as I said, completely ran out of gas against Port, and they outran us in the last quarter.
So if you've learnt anything from tonight's show, you've learnt that Geelong are out of their loading period. We might still be in it. And you also learnt a new word, spifflicate. That's a good one. I like that. I just looked it up. And yes, well used and in context. Well, let's get into your stats files, big man. You wanted to talk about some of Wheelo ratings. Andrew Wheeland, friend of Demonland. He's on Twitter as well. He has a website, Wheelo Ratings, so get straight into it.
So the key Demon stats, really for most of the game, except for the last quarter, the club Melbourne would have looked at the stats. I mean, really, really happy with how it looked. It looked like a Demons game for much of it. We beat them in metres gained, plus 102. Keeping in mind these numbers take in the full match, and we dropped away considerably in the last. So we had only one less inside 50 than them, 22 shots to 26 shots per goal, four more for them. Shots per inside 50, 42 to 49, 42.3. Contested possession, this is the number that Goody would have loved, 160 to 149. I don't know what it was at three-quarter time, but they beat us in the last quarter. So we still beat them plus 11 contested possession, which is one of their key indicators as we've talked. This one was really important. So this stats, thanks for Willow's made even more comprehensive on the stats file thread. It's one I've been looking for is the ground ball gets, because increasingly it's a super important stat. In footy, we won the ground ball gets, 106 to 104, keeping in mind that context of the last quarter. We got smashed in every stat that could indicate fatigue. We got smashed in contested possessions, kilometres run, time in forward half, inside 50, we got smashed in the last quarter. So to win this +2 for the game is impressive. 91 to 96 intercepts, I had 5 more. Intercept marks 23 to 19. Centre clearances 9 to 11. So that the numbers looked really good just on the stats track. Had another great game, and he's really going under the radar. And I reckon he's got a good chance of winning the Brownlow this year with Ollie missing these matches, because he's not having taken away from him. He had 16 contested possessions, 10 clearances, and 33 disposals. The team pressure was fascinating. So the first quarter was 183 for us, 206 to them. 206 is serious heat. Reminder, 200 is considered elite, 180 is considered AFL average. The second quarter, we ramped it up to 224. That's crazy good. That's like finals pressure. So that's super impressive. They fell away to 175. And for me, that's where we lost the game. That's where we needed to take advantage of our dominance, because we just couldn't put it on the scoreboard. Third quarter after halftime, 197. We were 214. In that third quarter, which again is super impressive. But then it just fell away, and you could see it. You didn't even need the pressure rating because it was on 7, so it wasn't coming up. But we fell away to 163 in that last quarter. So they were 197 in the third quarter. We were 214, and we spent our pennies, and we couldn't raise a trot in that last quarter. We fell away to 163. Which is why I think it was super impressive to only get beaten by 15 points. they increased their pressure rating in the last quarter from 197 to 204. So their rating went up in that last quarter, indicating a much fresher team, second week post-bye, running over the ground. And to me, that's the game. That's the game right there. You cannot win a game of footy when you are 163 pressure rating, your opponent is 204. They're applying too much pressure, smashed us in contested ball in that last quarter. The other thing that they did in the last quarter that was really indicative of the advantage they had fitness-wise and our struggles of running over the ground was they started moving the ball heaps better in the third term, and then in the final quarter they finished 33 points. They scored 33 points to our only 4 points in scored from the back half, from the defensive half. They don't do that at all. And that's our number one would normally, our ability to transfer it from the back half and score. 33-4, that's the game essentially right there. And we just couldn't. That was what you were talking about, George, before, is what Steve May was talking about. We let them bring the ball down the ground. We don't do that. And we couldn't go with them. We couldn't run.
But what I'm contending is they weren't running the ball up the ground. They were kicking it along the ground and deep and long. That's completely different methods to get it from one end of the ground to the other. They weren't running it.
Yeah, of course, though. But if we were fit, it wouldn't have mattered. We would have set it up our defensive zone and moved it across. Wouldn't have mattered how they moved it, whether they kicked it along the ground, kicked it in the air, did it by handball. When we're defensively on, we do not allow 33 points in a quarter of footy from the back half. I mean, we just don't.
I'm contending that we weren't playing wet weather football. And that was
no. I don't think we were particularly, and that's why I'm interested in the voicemail when we speak to it a bit later, because there's a question about, well, did we maximise our chance of winning this match? And I don't think we did. Hence the handballs, and so we'll talk about that a bit later. And now the key stat for me that shows this was an unusual game for Melbourne, and was the scores from turnover. So there's all of this discussion about stoppage, and there's a question tonight about stoppages and clearances. We scored 30 points from stoppages. They only scored 19. So we had a plus 11 differential in stoppages and clearances. Now, last year, everyone would have gone, well, Melbourne wins games of footy when we win that stat, right? So, and there's this emphasis on clearances. But as we've talked about, scores from turnover are a much more important stat in footy these days, and in particular for Melbourne. So this is a much more important scoring source than us for stoppages. But we won scores from stoppages. But in the turnover stats, it was 57 points to them, only 32 to us. No one puts 57 on turnover against us in normal run of things. It just doesn't happen. And it's all a big chunk of that was 33 points of that in that last quarter alone. So they scored 57 points, 33 of them in that last quarter when we were just out on our legs. So I think statistically it looked like our game for a big part of it, but there was some numbers in there that were really un-Melbourne, like in particular allowing teams to transition however they move the ball down the field, and them getting 57 points from turnover. And they did. Of course, they went full territory. And it's an interesting question why we didn't, George, I reckon. Why do we stick with the high number of handballs? We did that right from the get-go.
We didn't change the whole game.
No, and I think the reason we didn't comes to the question of that theme of it's the battle and the war. Because, we were clearly experimenting in this game again. We were clearly looking at different things. I mean, and there's a question, for instance, about Spargo. Why was he selected as the sub? Because I don't. They didn't maximise their chance of winning this game, is what I would argue.
Yeah. My other interesting question about pressure ratings, it would naturally go up in the wet.
Yeah, it should do,
yeah. So when you say teams are getting too, because the ball's not being moved. It's simple as that. So the opportunity for pressure is far greater in the wet because the ball doesn't move all that much. So players can tackle more. They can corral cover more than what they do in the dry. So
that's a fair point. But that even emphasises, that's a reasonable point, but that even emphasises a drop-off from 214 to 163 in the wet I mean, like that is a pretty massive drop off. And if I take your point, so if that's the case, and in wet weather rating, well, maybe that's only 140 rating. Then that's a huge drop off in one of our lowest of the entire season.
Yeah, but also when conditions dry out a little bit, then you'd expect it to drop. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but it didn't for Cats.
Yeah.
So the Cats increased their pressure in the last quarter, and ours completely fell off a cliff. It's no wonder we lost the game of footy. I mean, they wanted the ball more and able to get it more in that last quarter.
That's the bottom line.
All right, well, let's get into our listeners' questions. Sam6172 says, like Big Man, I tipped a loss this week. So far, every team bar the Saints, and I think Collingwood today, have lost coming out of the bye. It's painfully obvious that there were some tired legs there. Fourth quarter shows it. Just couldn't quite keep up anymore. Not to mention rain and a fresher Geelong, who I believe will start to hit their straps now. I think we showed a good amount of fight up until three-quarter time. Question for you guys is, do you think dropping Tomo for Petty was a good idea? I actually see a room in the team for both. The Petty forward experiment was just starting to bear fruit before his unfortunate injury. I think we need to land on our finals forward line now and give them a chance to really gel and work together before the sharp end of the season. So, George, we'll talk changes in our forward line later in the show, but what did you make of dropping Tomo off arguably one of his best games for the club on King's birthday? And I guess from a tactical perspective, but also from a morale perspective, or more importantly, like the kind of message that dropping someone who's had a good game sends. I mean, it can send a message of play well and, well, it doesn't matter, or alternatively it can send the message of, well, you play shit and you might still get a game. I don't know, that might be a bit extreme, but what did you think of that move?
I think people forget, firstly, Harrison Petty is a better player at football than what Tomo is. Just as simple, straightforward as that. The second question was, and I think we said this last week, given Cameron's ability to move, particularly further up the ground where he plays, he doesn't play down in front of the goals like people still think he does. That the best person to be able to go with him was Petty. Now, Tomo gets horribly exposed. Even I think the classic was in the game against Carlton where Mackay only got 3 goals, but they're all because I could out-accelerate Tomo very easily from a standing start, basically. The same situation would have occurred with Cameron. So while we do play a zone defence, Petty was the better person to be able to match up in the forward line. Petty has also been part of the zone defence for a long, long time. He knows how it's played. He's an integral component of it. So when Cameron went off, that's another question we'll talk about later on. But I think Petty was certainly the better option for us in terms of selection for this week.
Let's get on to the next one. Bobo says, I don't know how big of an undertaking it is, but I'd love to know what our forward 50 efficiency to goal is based upon teams finishing in the top 8 against other teams also finishing in the top 8 since 2018. I know we have a reputation for scoring big and faster times, but how does this stack up as an average year by year against other top 8 sides? It seems like this has been a consistent criticism of us for many, many years. I distinctly remember listening to Gary Lyon talking about this problem as far back as 2018. Our 2021 year seems an aberration in this regard. All good if I'm asking for too much, and you might be asking for too much. Getting those statistics of forward 50 efficiency for top 8 teams finishing against top 8 teams since 2018. That's a lot to ask for. Big Man, the stats going back, too big of an undertaking. It probably is. Can you give us any stats about this season, or perhaps comparisons with other seasons in regards to efficiency going inside 50?
I did have a look, and I couldn't find the sort of back to that period, like not in a way that was useful. It definitely has been an issue, and it goes back partly. I think there's 2 points really. It's accuracy is different to shots on goal. Shots on goal is a much better way of measuring connection. That's what Goody said in this match. Our connection was all right. Because you can't have a shot on goal unless you've connected somehow. Our accuracy has been an issue for a long time, and that's a point, we've been banging on for I've been banging on for ages, is that I think that we have got a poor kicking side. We still do. We've still got too many players. Even like our best player on the night, Petrarca. He misses too many targets for there's no question. Accuracy has been an issue. I think the whole conversation that we've been talking about over the few weeks, it's a complete furphy around the scoring thing. So this is thanks to some numbers that Engorged Onion, a poster, Demonland poster, has put up a couple of posts about this very topic, about our accuracy and scoring this season. So we're top three. So this is all just this season, so not previous seasons. We're top three for goal accuracy in the league still. So league average is 48%. We're 50.5 for accuracy. So top three still. We were number one in the AFL for goal accuracy up till round 10. Then we had the drop off. I've talked about why I think of what a factor in that drop off is. As big a factor is the fact that we've got lots of poor kicks. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that the only factor is the fatigue. We're top four for shots per game, which is more important in some respects, averaging 27. Port are 30 on top. Adelaide and Brisbane are next, 28 and 21. 28.8 and 28.1 respectively. League average is 25.5 a game. So we're almost two shots a game more than the league average. Our accuracy is 50.5. Goals per inside 50s is 23.7 scoring shots per game. And Brisbane's accuracy is 49.4. So we're doing better than them. Geelong are pretty accurate side, 52.9. We're top three for goal accuracy, as I said. And we're top four for shots. I mentioned that. So, and in the last 4 weeks, though, it's dropped off. So this is that period. This is this hyper focus the media and everyone seems to have on each week being some sort of bellwether that you can then sort of a litmus test for the final dance, for the big dance. So, but for the last 4 weeks, it's completely dropped away. 8.15, 8.18, 8.13 and 10.12. So it's dropped down to 41.46% our accuracy in the last 4 weeks, 6.5% behind league average. Now, I would contend that marries up with the period of accumulative fatigue starting to take its toll. It takes its toll on, the worse kick you are, the poorer your technique, the more fatigue will impact you, intersecting with increased mid-year periods of heavier blocks of training. So that's why Goody keeps saying, well, this is not an issue for us. The accuracy will resolve it. And when it does improve a bit, we'll start, it won't be 8.13, it'll be 13.8. And then no one will be talking about it, just as they weren't talking about it for the first, 7-8 rounds of the year.
Surfer D says, I love the pod and Binman's positivity about our team, but I see some serious flaws in our game plan. We're so inefficient going forward that the other teams actually want us to play in our own forward half. This leads to the opposition getting the ball 9 out of 10 times. I think, Binman, you might not agree. Then they take the risky option. They go down the middle, they go fast, and they burn us with speed. It's risky and it leads to turnovers. However, we're one of the worst teams in the league at turning a turnover into a goal. So I'd like to get your view on that in a minute, Binman. So the risk to the opposition of playing this way is mitigated. We bludgeon ourselves all night in the contest, but other teams just need to be vaguely okay in the contest and flood our backline. Then they go for it. We need to move the ball from the defensive half with speed, at least sometimes, to break the pattern. I just think we're easy to coach against because you know what we're going to do before we do it, and it requires a defensive system to be perfect. So, Binman, I don't think I agree with Surfer D, and I don't think you will either.
Well, I was reflecting after the last couple of mega podcasts that was our loading phase. So I'm sort of absolutely focused tonight on being sharper with my responses. So what my response to that question is that that's all correct. That's all. I would agree with all of it, but only for the last 2 or 3, 4 matches. And that's what I've been talking about. Think of the season as 3 acts. The first act is the January, February big training period. You roll into the season, fresh as the daisy. You go back and then rounds 4, 5, 6. The rounds 1 to 6 are the ones to look at. They're the ones that are going to be the template for the flag, not the last 4 games when we're kicking 8-13, 8-15, 8-16. So all of those comments I would agree with as they relate to the last handful of games that we've played. But they don't hold true at all for the first 6 rounds. I mean, they just don't in any way. We are number 1 in the AFL from scores from turnover. We are the best at that when we're on. We haven't been in the last few weeks, just as I made the point about Geelong scoring more points from us from turnover. That just basically never happens when we're on. It happens at the moment because of these external factors around fatigue. So I would agree with them at the moment. And it goes to the question, this came up last year and it came up the previous year. Well, should Goody then change the way he plays in the middle of the year to increase the chances of us winning this match? And he doesn't do that. And because his belief is in the system, his belief is that the risk of doing that makes it harder to instinctively back yourself in under the pressure of a grand final. If you've spent 4 or 5 games in the middle of the season trying different things to mitigate the impact of exactly those things, maybe that will have a negative impact come, when it really matters. I would say about this match is that it didn't matter. A loss didn't change our chances of finishing top 4 one little bit. I mean, look at the ladder. There's already a massive gap between those top 4 sides and the bottom 4 sides. So I would agree with those comments as they relate to the last handful of matches. But as we move forward into the last act of the season, the last third of the season, increasingly they will become, moot.
We've been very lucky in the last 2 weeks with other results that have sort of worked in our favour in terms of keeping a bit of separation between us and the top 4.
But they would have factored that in, wouldn't they? I mean, imagine how the analysis that we do of our draw. Imagine what they do. I mean, they all know who's strengths and weaknesses. And I mean, St Kilda aren't a threat. Adelaide aren't a threat at the moment. They can win individual games, but it's a calculated gamble, wasn't it?
We've got another one that's similar to this, and I'll ask George to give his thoughts on it in a moment. So regarding our forward line, Monocular says, is there something fundamentally wrong, like a lack of direction in our forward/mid connection and forward leading patterns, having an ex-ruckman as a forward coach and our current inexperienced sole big forward, JVR, who is, despite all, is progressing beautifully in his development? It is becoming incredibly frustrating to watch the wastage of our forward thrust, both failing to get the ball and when we do, poor conversion. Why so different to 2021? No Ben Brown or T-Mac, of course, must be a factor. Competi, JVR, Smith and all fit in the same forward line, one less small and maybe the ruckman dropping behind the ball rather than pretending to be marking forwards with both Smith and Fritsch being hybrid, tallish marking, quick and pressuring. The classic smalls, Cossie, Chandler and maybe A and B are not scoring or contributing enough, though Cossie did get 2 goals this Thursday. Big Mac Jr. adds, I think even more than the missed shots at goal, I was disappointed at the lack of focus and concentration 50 to 80 metres from goal. There were a number of Geelong smothers that where the D's players telegraphed the handball/kick and didn't have the same running zip and polish they had back earlier in the season, as Big Man you've just alluded to. You can see the disappointment on the key forwards allowing easy marks to Geelong. Some were from giving up front position, but a lot were because of illegal holding and blocking from Geelong's defensive unit. Don't get me started on the holding of Petrarca. So, George, forward efficiency, forward connection. Later we'll be talking about forward accuracy. We've already talked about it a little bit. Am I starting to see a worrying pattern, George? Or is it just fatigue?
It's difficult to answer this because there's so many components being brought up. Look, there's no doubt that the forward line is not functioning the way we want it to. The absence of Ben Brown and T-Mac for injury reasons has severely affected the way that I think we wanted to approach it from the start. We're getting the ball in there certainly enough times, and we're getting the results in terms of the scoreboard of it. We're not getting the results from where we think that we should be getting it from, I think is the problem. The small forwards generally are not contributing enough in terms of scoreboard pressure. They're just not getting the numbers. They're barely a goal a game, and in some cases, for the people playing the forward line, far less than a goal a game. You can't afford to have 3 or 4 players in the side barely putting a mark on the scoreboard when they're playing as forwards. I think somebody else said we're probably playing one too many smalls at the moment. The trouble is we haven't got another tall to play up there. We've seen Shaki come in. Believe me, he's not the answer. We've tried him plenty of times before. I think you'll see something more established. We've had indications that Goodwin wants to play Petty further forward, so we'll have apart from this week when, like I said, he put him back to cover a need down back. I think we'll see him play more forward. We may well see Ben Brown come back in this week, given his performance at Casey, which was quite good. So there's a number of factors at play. What else? There are a lot of stuff in that question. Can JVR, Petty, and Smith all fit in the forward line? I think in one way, shape, or form, yes, they can, but it could be with Ben Brown and maybe even T-Mac by the end of the season coming back. So I think you'll see a change as we go into the second half of the season with more talls and perhaps less smalls.
George,
I wouldn't take everything based on this game because there were so many different. The wet weather, the fatigue, the injuries to Geelong players, things like that. Changed the way that we perhaps wanted to play up forward. Like I said, we're getting the ball in there enough to warrant that the system itself is working, but we're just not getting the output that certainly we as fans desire.
George, you just talked about Smith, Petty, and JVR, whether they can play all in the same forward line. Now, in your match report, you were quite critical of both Grundy and Max as forwards. Yeah, so do you want to talk to that?
I don't think that experiment has worked in any way, shape or form, simply because they haven't produced goals. What's been disappointing is that even back to pre-season when we were looking at the training sessions, Melbourne, like other teams at the top of the ladder, are now driving the ball far deeper into the forward line than what they did last year. The game is being played in a different way. And the premise, I think, is get the ball in as deep as possible and bring the ball to ground. We don't see marks in front of goal, in contested situations like we'd all love to. It's more about get the ball to the ground, let the small forwards do their work. The trouble is that the small forwards aren't doing their work at the moment for us for the number of times it goes in there. And when you've got Grundy and Max resting in there, they're not getting any rest. Even if they're standing in the goal square, theoretically diverting the attention of the larger defenders they're not getting their hands on the ball. Give them a break and put them on the bench is what I'd be saying at the moment. But they're not providing the output that we need. Maybe they're putting them in there because we haven't got that third tall. Let's wait and see if once we get a few more. I think Ben Brown, like I said, will probably be really putting his hands up for this week. But I think as the season progresses, that we'll see a more stable forward line than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, no, that's my read too, Joe. I think that Goody's he's done it every season so far. Sometimes because he's had no choice, but he's kept that forward line fluid. We've had this conversation so many times, haven't we, about what's the best forward line mix? And I think it was Johnson saying that Melbourne really needs to lock it down now. I don't think that's what Goody wants to do. He wants to keep it fluid, and he wants to keep those systems fluid. But I really, my big question on the forward line is Ben Brown, because hopefully T-Mac sounds like he's on good track, it sounds like. So, I'm really hopeful he'll be fit enough to be an option because, but Ben Brown, if he does get fit, I'm hoping that, he obviously does get fit. And then, my feeling is they'll bring him in for the back half or the back third of the season for that reason, the structural stuff. And I guess, one of the interesting things is that around the whole fatigue and loading discussion is, that nuance, George, that you mentioned before, or maybe it isn't now, or, what I think why it's helpful or important to at least factor it in is because the game plan, it depends when you're talking about the game plan, whether you're talking about it when we're at our optimal fitness and we, like we are round 1 and round 2, or it's now, because our game plan, it's predicated on being at optimal fitness. And so one thing I'd urge people to do, just because it's fun, but also to get a sense of how we score and the difference between the way we score when we're completely on and fresh and now in the middle of the year when we look like we're running with concrete boots, is to go watch watch all of the all the goals compilations on the Melbourne Footy website up till now, and you'll see a change in how we create goals. And one of the most striking things you'll see is how much space when in the first few rounds, how much space there is up forward for players to move into, to run ahead of the ball. How many goals are created by overlap run? How many Joe the Goose goals we're getting in those first few games that we're not getting now? So my point being is that when we think about our game style, the way we score, the way we move the ball, the way we defend, are we talking about when we're at optimal fitness, or are we talking about right now for this match? Because if we're talking about right now for the match, all of the issues that everyone's highlighting are certainly accurate, that's for sure. One of the funny, interesting things about this game around shots for goal is that from our scoring, we had from general play was our major scoring source. So 14 shots at goal from general play, 4 goals, 8, 32, 28% accuracy. And we only had 8 set shots for 4-2. So we weren't actually that inaccurate from our set shots. We were 50%, which is bang on AFL average from set shots, 4-2. They scored 6-4. They had 14 set shots. That's a huge differential, 6 more set shots. And a lot of that was what Steve May was talking about. I mean, it means they're getting marks inside 50 and or free kicks, I guess. So what the Cats did, we obviously couldn't get, our fair share of marks. But that's a really anomalous set of numbers in terms of general play versus set shots.
Next question. You've talked to this a little bit, Binman, so see what you can do. Red Jacket has a question for you, Binman. You noted in the mid-season review, which was an excellent podcast, by the way, that we were low down the AFL rankings for clearance and stoppages, 9th and 16th respectively. You mentioned that we have a focus more on winning the ball from turnovers, and that's where we generate most of our scoring from. That's fine, I get that, but we also have some midfield bulls, so why can't we still be winning from stoppages? I presume we're not trying to lose the stoppage to generate that turnover. Why can't we win the ball at stoppages and be a great turnover team too? Winning turnovers, not turning the ball over. It just baffles me with the talent that we have in the guts, all Australian recipients, coaches award leaders and predicted Brownlow medal contenders, that we aren't winning the pill more often. Granted, we won the stoppages against the Cats this week. So, B-Man, can we be a team that generates its scores from the coalface by winning the ball first at clearances and a team that prides itself on being the best at scores from turnovers? In other words, can we have our cake and eat it too? Now, you say that teams don't score that much from stoppages, but yeah, I guess what they're asking as well is not just scores. We're not winning the pill then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting because there was a lot of criticism about what Melbourne did and didn't do last year, and Goody's stubbornness and not experimenting, and a lot of that I think was unfair. But what he's not getting credit for is that they went through a review and he's made some significant changes. One of which is reducing the emphasis on stoppages, so that the data from Champion Data shows that you're twice as likely to score from a turnover as you are from a stoppage. We won the stoppages in this game, I'll remind, and we lost the game. We also lost the thingo. But the shorter answer is no, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You've got to give something. If you get something, you've got to give something up. And
So explain that.
Sure, we could win more stoppages, no worries. We could match their numbers at the contest. Which, by the by, interestingly, Collingwood did in today's game, and I would suggest they did that because of their issues with fatigue, which is really they did the opposite. They dropped a player back today to protect themselves from losing the stoppages. I said not the bringing the extra. So yeah, we could generate more. The best stoppage team in the AFL is the Suns. And the problem for the Suns is that they don't score enough on turnover. So if you take away their stoppage domination, then they struggle to score. They're exactly the same scenario for the Blues, but it's in a way because it's really 2-year-old footy. Two seasons ago footy. You need to be able to score for turnover. One of the best things about the Pies game is they've got a really good balance between winning stoppages and being able to score from turnover, but they're still not as good as us at scoring from turnover, which is a vulnerability for them because you can win turnovers by putting on a huge amount of pressure, by blocking the corridor, by challenging the opposition to take risky kicks on. Or alternatively, we could decide against the Pies, we're going to make sure that we win every stoppage. But in order to do that, we would have to bring one of our players up to the contest, who then we lose as an intercept marking option. And so, it's a calculated risk. But, I think the best probably example is we won the clearances in this game and lost the game. And last year, at this time last year, people were saying, well, how can we win so many clearances and not score from them? And as George has pointed out, the whole thing about stoppages is, particularly now, it's not about the quantity of stoppages. It's not how many you win of them. It's how many you score from it. So it's the quality of them. They're of no value in of themselves if you just win it. Like Hawthorn today won, they're like second or third best stoppage team in the AFL, Hawthorn. They won their share of stoppages early on in the first quarter, but just kept on kicking it back to Gold Coast, who then ran it down there and scored. So, in this game, we won stoppages, kicked it back to Geelong's halfback flank. And as George noted, and as Steve May noted, they ran it down. As I said, they scored 33 points from the back half. And that's because half of them, we win the stoppage, kick it into our forward line, and they intercept. We couldn't stop Stewart in that second half of footy, for instance. He just sweated on Smith, and really, that was a big ask for Smith, I thought, going on Stewart. But they really hurt us with those intercept marks. A lot of them were from dump kicks when we won the stoppage, and dump kicked it in, and they scored on transition. So, short answer is no. You can't really have your cake and eat it too on that front.
All right, no cake for anyone. Bigfoot says, logged on to Demonland and was going to post about how the D's have really struggled this year in the wet conditions, but see that someone beat me to it and has already started a thread about this. This year we have played 3 games in wet conditions, Essendon, Port and now Geelong, and in all 3 games we have struggled in these conditions. We just can't seem to adjust our game plan to play in the wet, so what is the solution? At the break of Gorn answers, I'd actually argue that in those wet games, it was when it would turn dry, our game fell away. For example, we got up to a 3-goal lead against Port, and I think it would have stayed that way if the rain had continued. When it dried up in the last, Port got on top. On Thursday night, when it dried up in the last, Geelong got on top. Even against Essendon, most of the damage was done in the first half when it wasn't raining. Watson 11 contends that the weather nullifies our game plan, turnovers and scores. However, the game plan is sound, and forward half turnovers plus defending opposition inside 50s are what wins flags. I'm not that worried about the loss overall, but I'm worried that if it's wet for our first final, our strength, turnovers and running are taken away, and when it's wet and we don't seem to adapt to those conditions. Question for the podcast is, does the panel have any other theories about our poorer form in the wet? George, is wet weather, or more accurately a slippery deck once the rain clears, is that our kryptonite? And if so, why is that so?
$64,000 question or whatever. I think Watson 11 summed it up. Our game plan is based around turnovers and defence. When it's wet, we don't seem to adapt quickly enough, or individual players don't adapt enough. I think we saw it dramatically in this game with Geelong. People like Close were just simply kicking the ball along the ground to get it forward. We talk about the territory game, and in the wet, you've got to gain the territory as much as you possibly can. 50 more handballs in the wet by any stretch is not a game being played properly. I think you've just got to change things slightly up. You're not going to get clean possession all the time. You're not going to get the chains of possessions going up the ground that we so dramatically depend upon. The ball hits the ground more often. You've just got to move it forward, whichever way you can. The intercepts that Geelong were getting from Stewart in particular, he didn't muck around. He wasn't kicking it sideways like Geelong traditionally have done. It was kick it long straight down the guts in some cases to get the ball moving forward. That's just wet weather football. But like Ben Man said, by the time we get to the end of the year, and hopefully it doesn't pour down rain in September when we're there, you don't have the need to play that style of game. So it's been disappointing that we haven't adapted individually. I find it hard to believe that coaches would need to tell AFL level players, don't handball the thing at 3/4 time, just kick it and get it forward, because we're looking for territory. We're looking for opportunities up the forward line. But
except the question I'd have, George, is like an alternative question. would be it's possible that the coach told them to keep handballing, because that's what I'm saying about if he believes, and I'm not saying this is the case, but if Goody believes in the long run, our chances of winning the flag are increased by not individually slicing up a game and in a game that maybe they had gone in thinking, well, we can lose this game. It's not a target game like the Pies game was the previous week. Let's say hypothetically that's the scenario. I think there's every chance Goody would have said, keep handballing. Don't go back don't play wet weather footy. We want you to practice your handballs. So,
the fact is it was wet weather football, and you can't take that away. So
maybe they wanted to practice handballing in wet weather football.
Well, you practice losing the game then.
Well, maybe. But, we wouldn't have lost the game if we didn't drop away at 163. We could have won that game. So even with a remarkable differential in handball, we still would have won the game, couldn't we? So, it depends. It sort of pivots a little bit on that question that'll be in the voicemail, Andy. But, I think with the slippery thing, it's any team that like watching footy now. You've got to chain. It's incredible how quickly how much their handballing skills improved since. Really, you have to say the Dogs revolutionised it. It's amazing what they're doing. I'm not fully convinced it's a handball. These over the head jobs that everyone seems to be doing, because it used to be you'd have to have your hand flat to do it. But we have struggled in the wet, haven't we? We have struggled, and I think there's players who genuinely aren't one-touch players. That's a big issue for us. I think.
I think that was the other outcome of this game. The wet weather exposes the players of low skill. They can't deliver, and sadly, there are a number of players who keep repeating that in our side. And
Track's one of them, I have to say. Track is a funny combination of brilliant half volleys that he picks up off the deck and inexplicable fumbling. And I reckon, speaking of Steve May's improving week on week as we've talked about, but is still struggling to pick up the ground ball and fumbled a couple of times again, which cost us a goal as it did against the Pies last week. But I think the concern is that what you just said then, George, is that we've got some low-skilled players that the wet weather exposes those low skills, particularly around handling the ball.
Singer says, the Cameron injury was horrific, but why did we not take advantage of this tactically and swing Petty forward? Redlegs 23 follows up saying, well, we did, just an hour too late. And I can't disagree with that. I was wondering the same thing. George, did we make a tactical error not swinging Petty forward once we didn't need the matchup on Cameron? And I'm assuming we decided to bring, as we've talked about, we brought Petty in over Tomlinson for the Cameron matchup. So once that matchup was no longer in play, should we have been proactive and moved Petty forward, perhaps made them make some changes on the fly in terms of their own matchups? What do you think of that situation?
I think the answer to that is another question. If you move Petty forward, who do you move back?
Well, without Cameron there, it changes the equation.
But we play a zone defence.
Yeah, okay.
That's the difference.
Well,
so
you're going to Tomlinson out of the equation. So.
Well, we didn't have the sub. Yeah. But would you send Smith to the back line? I don't think that was the answer either, because Smith has been training as a forward for the whole season. So they were caught between the devil and the deep blue sea in this particular circumstance. I don't think we lost anything by leaving Petty down the back line. The deficiency was up in the forward line, where we weren't getting the contest from the forwards, and that while Petty would provide more contest, you can't play at two ends of the ground at the same time. So it's too simplistic an answer to say, we should have moved him straight up at the forward line.
And the forward line wasn't really the issue in the last quarter. It was we're not getting the ball inside the forward line. It wasn't really an issue. It wasn't a night for forward marking anyway. And the ball was hitting the deck enough. It was just that it was getting spirited out of there. I thought, as we talked about last week, I thought / hoped that Petty would play forward and Tomo would stay in the side. And so I thought it was actually quite curious to bring, if there is any thought of Petty playing forward, it's sort of slightly contradicting, sort of bringing in Petty for 1 week. If he's any plan to go forward again, it seems a strange move to me, I thought. I suspect a big part of bringing Petty in rather than giving him a break to the Giants game is that to get him a game of footy. But to be perfectly honest, I didn't think he had a very good game at all, and made a couple of blues that were rusty. And certainly, Tomo was really unlucky to get dropped. I mean, as I said last week, I would have given him a vote if it was in the Brownlow last week.
But the other option, the consequence was Smith had only played the one game, so they would have dropped Smith to be able to provide.
That's right.
The space.
Or not necessarily. They could have not selected Spargo as sub, and Smith.
Next question coming up.
Well, the question from Lazy is a bit of a follow-up about Petty, asking if missing 6 weeks of footy and being possibly underdone, was it a harder task for Petty to play down back than up forward? And we have said that the decision to play him back was based on matchups, in particular that matchup on Cameron. B-Man, any thoughts on whether playing forward or back is harder coming off a 6-week injury?
Not personally, no. I've never played AFL coming off an injury or not coming off an injury. I wouldn't have thought it'd be any easier at either end of the ground. And, in some respects, I've always thought that defenders, it's a much tougher gig, much harder in some respects, because their mistakes, everyone howls them down, and the mistakes that cost a goal, it's like the fingers get pointed. A full forward misses a chest mark and it's forgotten instantly, even though both is the same result. We give up a goal. So no, I wouldn't have thought so, and not particularly, playing on a player like Cameron. I would have thought that's a pretty hard gig. Sorry, was it who playing forward or back? Either way,
Petty, just whether it's harder. I mean, just a reminder, none of us played footy at the highest level or even at the lowest level. So,
but on the question of whether they should have moved Petty forward, it depends. Like George said, scoring wasn't particularly an issue for us. Accuracy was an issue for us. So it depends what problem they were trying to solve. And it didn't really matter in the last quarter, because it was the speed at which the ease at which they were moving the ball down the ground was the problem in the last quarter. I don't know. I doubt it would have made a huge amount of difference, but I thought it was a really curious decision. Tough on Tomo, but if you were going to play more about Petty, is definitely, obviously going to be picked ahead as a defender. But if there is any thought about playing Petty in the future as a forward, I thought it will become, in hindsight, so to speak, a curious decision to play him down back, I think.
I think the other thing that people need to remember is go back to the Selwyn Griffith interview. People are not players these days are not unprepared when they come back to play AFL.
Yeah, that's right.
You might be desperate, like probably we were last year towards the end of the season, because you've got no other options. Players are playing with injuries and things like that, but they are well and truly prepared to play football. They don't need to go down to Casey to get a game under their belt as people. Sure. Yeah, it's a concept from years gone by. It's all about what happens on the training track and the loads that they put into them and the miles they cover. They don't need to be running around in second grade competitions to try and get the time up. They're doing so much work these days. So when he comes into the side, he's ready. And Salo was the perfect example of that, despite being out of the side, for what was it, nearly half the season effectively. And he's come back, and he's probably one of the best players in the last 2 weeks that we've had on the field.
But just on that, I guess he's a good example, isn't he, Salo? I take your point completely. But it's still going to take them 2 or 3 weeks to get their touch back, isn't it? Certainly did with Salem, I think. So that's not a reason not to play them, because they're probably more likely to get their AFL level touch back much more quickly playing in the AFL team than playing at Casey.
We've got a voicemail call to play now, so I'll play that.
Boys, possibly calling you the day after the game, so it's probably not the best idea, but I just thought I'd ask you a multiple choice question to kick off my question. It's a wet, cold night in Geelong. Who do you pick as a potential sub? Would you pick Jake Bowie? Reliable, tough, hard, contested bull, good user? Would you pick James Harmes? Premiership player, midfielder, strong, tough. Would you pick Luke Dunstan? Killing it in the VFL when he's in there. All these last 3 players are playing VFL this week. Scrappy, hard at the ball, hard at the contest. Or do you pick Charlie Spargo? Horribly out of form, can play one position on the ground, gets 2 touches in a quarter and a half, doesn't look anywhere near it, and only can play in the one location. I'm pretty sure we made some huge tactical errors last night, but I can't understand for the life of me why you'd play Charlie Spargo as a sub. please discuss a little bit salty. Probably repeated myself a couple of times. Thanks again.
That was our anonymous caller. Did ask you to give us a name, even a fake one. It doesn't matter. B-Man.
Salty. No, we'll go with Salty.
Salty, yeah. Charlie Spargo, best selection as the sub for this match? Question mark.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Andy. Yeah, it's a really interesting question from Salty, and why I was keen to answer this one, why I put my hand up to answer this question, is it goes to the point I was touching on before. It depends. The answer to that question depends on whether they were looking to have the most chance of winning this game of football. So if this game was in a bubble, isolated, and this was all bets in for this game, then yes, maybe you play Harms. Then yes, maybe you don't play an underdone Spargo. Yes, maybe, I'm not sure about Dunstan, but he's certainly a good in and under wet weather player, but I don't think he's really anywhere near the AFL senior team at the moment. But so yes, maybe Harms comes in because he's ready to go. So that, and this maybe might be a little bit controversial or not sit right with but it's like I said about Hibbo not being selected 2 weeks ago. If you think whenever it was that he was managed, if you agree that he's best 22 and you manage him, you are accepting that for that given match, we are not maximising our chance of winning the game. And I would apply the same logic to this game. There are a number of things that we could have done to increase our chances of winning the game with selection. Spargo's selection being one of them. And the short answer is on Spargo, I would have thought is exactly what Goody said at the beginning of the season, how they were going to use the sub. It was going to be a combination of load management and tactics, and Spargo, who's looking like he's been flagging. I predicted it last week on the podcast that he would be the sub. And my assumption is it's part of managing his load, with the goal for him being he's a best 22 player. You want him in best shape come September. Being in best shape come September, part of that plan and program is him playing as a sub in the game just gone. Now, you could make an argument that decreased our chances of winning this particular game of footy, and I would agree with that. And that's why it's an interesting discussion. If all we were trying to do is win this game of footy, would have they experimented with staying there overnight? Randomly out of nowhere, go down there the night before and train and do all of that? Would have they brought Petty back in off a 6-week break? Would have they, experimented with, as I said, with Spargo? Would have Jordan been playing? Some of the answer would have they brought Harms in? They probably would have if it was a must-win game. It wasn't a target game, is where I'm going with all of this. If it was a target game, those questions would all be valid, and I don't think it was.
I think people.
Sorry, Andy.
I think people would have a hard time accepting that any game you don't go trying to win.
The players are all trying to win, and the club's trying to win. Of course, they're trying to win. This is where it's the nuance, and it's where it's a challenging concept. The club is trying to win this game of footy, 100%. It starts. They're doing everything they can to win it. But the handball, for instance, experimenting with the handball, they clearly came into this game with a clear plan to handball, even a lot more than we normally do, even in dry conditions, yet they did it under instruction, my assumption would be. And so, they're experimenting with players in different positions. So that is not, if they wanted to maximise their chance of winning, is what I'm saying, that they would have done different things with selections. So that's different. I know it's nuanced, but that's different to saying they're not trying to win.
But it sounds like going down there the day before, training there, staying overnight, treating it as an interstate game. That seems like they're trying to maximise their chance of winning the game. That doesn't sound like they're trying not to maximise.
But that's an experiment, isn't it? That's like, if you were really seriously, if this was all stakes in, we have to win this game of footy down at Cardinia Park. Would the club, for the first time ever? Well, I think they did it a few years ago, maybe 15 years ago when Uzo was playing. If this was a must-win game that they 100% needed to win it to get into the 8, for instance, the last round, would they experiment with a move like that? There's no way. There's no way they would. If it was a must-win game, they would just randomly go, you know what, we're going to experiment this year, and I'll go stay in a hotel down at Geelong. The routine is so important for these players, and they play in home, and everything is routine. Why would they take the risk in a must-win game of throwing their routines all out of whack?
Well, it's a must-win game for me because I have nephews that vary for Geelong. I had to front up to dinner on Friday night with them, George.
Yeah, I think the difficulty with Spargo is that he's such a limited option on the field. He's a one-position player alone. I couldn't understand why they took Jordan off to be replaced with someone who provides nothing more. We know exactly what Charlie Spargo's providing. The trouble is, when I was talking about the forwards who aren't providing anything this season, Spargo's only kicked 10 goals for the whole season in 11 games.
But he's not a small forward. He's a high half forward, and it's that running.
That's a small forward. That's what we're playing these days. He's
not a goal kicker. He wasn't last year, and he's not this year.
So we've got another forward who can't kick goals.
But we don't need to kick goals. We don't have a scoring issue, George. What's going on here? We don't have a scoring issue. We don't need Spargo to be kicking goals.
That's why he was subbed, because he's not playing as they want to play. The team kicks the ball deep into the forward line and waits for, and is depending on the small forwards to crumb the ball. Basically,
and he's not a small forward. Chandler and Posey are the small forwards.
Yeah, and he's not crumbing.
And Spargo are the high half forwards.
Yeah, but he's not providing. He's not crumbing. He's not kicking goals.
Who? Spargo.
That's
what I'm saying, he's not in the team to kick goals. He's a high half forward.
So why is he in the team at all?
Because, as I've said. As Tom McDonald said, the hardest role in football, and this is his words, Tom McDonald's role, the hardest role in football is the high half-forward role that Nibbler and Spargo play. It is the hardest role in football, again, Tom McDonald's word, because they have to track the ball up the ground into defence. And when the ball's turned over in our defence, they have to get on their bike and beat the ball back. Get in front of the ball, so when the ball goes into the forward line and provide an option. And they don't have to do that once. They have to do that all day, every day. As Tom McDonald, he couldn't have been clearer. The hardest role in football is what he said.
But Charlie Spargo's not providing it.
Well, yeah, of course he is.
And that's why he was subbed off.
He was subbed off because he's running out of gas. That's clearly. And that's okay. So he was subbed off last week, George, right?
Yeah.
Why? And so you're saying that's an indicator of him not playing his role. Why did they select him this week then?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out, because
right.
I think they were.
Grazer would suggest they were happy with him. They would drop him if he wasn't doing his role, and would be that he's load management, that he's a sub for load management.
And we're saying that there are other options available to provide a far better for the team on the day. That's as simple as that. Jordan was already provided. I can't understand why Jordan was taken off the ground. He wasn't playing great, but at least he was partially keeping Stewart honest up until the last quarter when he came off.
Which is really the point I'm trying to make about whether it's a target game. So Spargo wouldn't have been your first choice sub if this was a must-win game. He would have been on the ground for a start if it was a must-win game. But you could see him, he's clearly running with concrete in his boots. The reason he's a sub, I'm assuming, is for load management reasons, because they need him playing that role come September. That's no one else in the team can play it. Maybe Smith. I'm not sure whether he could run the sort of distances that Spargo can. Whether he's up for the hardest role in football, I'm not sure. But no one else is. Laurie couldn't track those distance. Gus couldn't play that role. He's not quick enough. You need a combination. As Tom McDonald pointed out, one of the complexities of that role is that you need a player who is incredibly aerobically fit, but can run fast over 100 metres, 200 metres in the fast striding that they talked about. And he said the only players who can come close to that in the team are Nibbler and Spargo. Now, if there's someone else in the wings I don't know about, maybe they'll have to build it. But Spargo is best 22 for that role. And that's why he was a sub. That's why he didn't get dropped completely, I would have thought.
Tune in to next week's Demonland podcast to witness the no-holds-barred cage match between Bimman and George.
Well, at least we're arguing about Spargo, not Nibbler this year.
exclusive on demonland.com. Dominion notes, previously on Accuracy Watch, we kicked 167 goals, 108 in the first 11 games with an average of 15 goals, 10 behinds, as B-Man noted earlier. In the last 3 weeks, we've kicked 24 goals, 46 behinds with an average of 8 goals, 15 behinds. Our accuracy on goal is definitely a problem and is most certainly letting us down. And you're not going to get any argument from me in regards to our accuracy based on Dominion's averages from the past 3 games versus the first 11 games. We're down 7 goals and up 5 behinds on average. In the first part of the season, whilst we're all marvelling at our amazing accuracy, I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it has come down with a thud. Inaccuracy has been the bane of many D's fans' existences over the past few years. It improved out of sight early in the season, but it's back with a vengeance. In the last 7 weeks since the Kangaroos match, we've kicked 73 goals, 93 behinds, and if you would then include the Kangaroos game, it's 95 goals, 100 behinds. So we went from almost 50% to what B-Man had said earlier. George, is there any way we can fix this? Is it fatigue? We don't have to spend too long on it because I think we have already.
Yeah, I think we've already talked about this. It's disappointing. The goal kicking, and over the last couple of weeks since I've been back, the set shots have been the problem alone. And what's been really disappointing for the games that I've attended is that they were easy set shots. They weren't from the boundaries, the difficult ones. In fact, we've been kicking from the boundaries, courtesy of Van Rooyen and others. But it's the easy ones from the people who you really expect to kick well. Fritsch has missed a number of dead easy shots, and then he'll turn around and kick 2 or 3 to sort of even up the score for the day. But the reason Binman reckons it's loading and fatigue, it's certainly fatigue, but set shots have always been a bane of mine in AFL. Doesn't matter what season it is, what year it is. I always go back to the basketball analogy. If you put someone on on the free throw line in basketball, they'll get it 98% of the time, but in AFL football 50% seems to be okay from dead in front 40 metres out.
Yeah, I think the real issue is, again, that we've got a lot of poor kicks. Like that, it's great to see JVR, he's neat sort of kicking action, but I think there's a lot of players with average techniques, and Gorney being one of them. Track's been much better this year, hasn't he?
Just on JVR, took a ripper of a 1-grab mark in the wet, mind you.
That was a great mark. Got jumped up high too, didn't he? I didn't, really good spring.
This one's also maybe one for you, Big-Man. I'm not sure if you got the predicted score stuff. Mail says, as an aside to D-Minion's question on our accuracy, I'd be interested in what our predicted scores have been in all games this year. Out of the 14 games, how many should we have won and lost by the AFL's average? Have we stolen any wins? Should we have any of the losses, etc.? Keep up the great work, guys. So, Big-Man, do you have the predicted scores from our games this season, and what does it tell you in terms of where those stats say we should be after 14 games? Also, could you possibly give us a rundown on how they calculate predicted scores?
Expected score, that's the stat. Yeah, expected, and they calculate it. They look at every kick that's a shot for goal, whether it's missed, whether it's on the full, whether it's a number of data points go into determining the likelihood, including their record from that spot, how much pressure they were on, I think maybe the time in the match or the time of the quarter to factor in, fatigue. So I didn't have time to find the numbers, but however, I do know that in 2 of our losses, at least, unexpected scores, so Freo and Port, we won both of those games on expected scores. So
is that expected scores? Is that after the fact? Do they talk about that after the fact or before the game?
No, before. After the fact. They look at every shot that's kicked and come up with what should be the expected score, taking in inaccuracy, taking in their individual players' record from when it comes up on the Fox Footy, they'll say this from this shot. Yeah. So factoring in a whole range of things to determining what in a normal run of events, what would have the result of that kick been? Would have more likely been a goal or whatever, and to land on an expected score. So last week against the Pies, my guess for expected score was we won that game by 5 goals on expected score, but it was actually only 19 points, which was a little bit surprising, and that would have been factoring in that they missed some
they did.
Gettable shots, and you tend not to look at them.
This question again, when I'll read them out to give them their due for asking the question, but I think we've talked it to death because it is about loading. Monocular says, thanks guys for your insightful analysis of our beloved club's performance. I think it was B-Man who last week predicted a loss on the back of loading. Do you still feel this way? Was the basis of our loss, and in particular our very poor final quarter? You've answered that. Big Mac Jr. adds, I think a bit of anomaly that the 7th worst last quarter team handily outrun and outplayed the best fourth quarter team in the AFL this season. Lots of tired bodies out there and lines up well with Selwyn's designated loading period. I think we're done talking about loading tonight. So unless there's anything you want to add to that.
Just one really short thing is that's not the reason we lost. It's a factor in the loss. So I didn't think we would lose because of it. I thought the game would be a scrappy, that we would be lucky to win, and a large reason why, a big factor, is the fatigue.
Are we out? Go ahead.
Which is the reason for these teams losing post-bye, by the way. It's not, it's statistically not possible. You have a look at the numbers. The only teams that have won so far post-bye are a team playing the Pies and the Saints playing a team who are also coming off a bye, which is yet another leg up, by the way, for the Pies this season. But that's like, there's a nut now that's, I think it's 10-1 or 10-2. Something like that. So we've got 6 more, I think 10-2. That's way more than a statistical sort of anomaly. And I mean, it's even clearer this year than last year.
And I see there's been a lot of talk about how they do the buys and spread them over. What is it? It's about 4 or 5 weeks these days.
Yeah, well, and I reckon, that's what I said last week, I reckon they do that. So they should just have 1 week where that's the bye, the whole competition takes it off, because that's the only way to be fair about it. Otherwise, you have scenarios where, like Collingwood definitely got a leg up playing Adelaide today, both coming off a bye.
Trouble is they won't do that because they won't give a free kick to NRL in terms of television.
Well, no, that's right. And I don't think they want to do that either, because they want Hawthorn beating Brisbane. They want the Giants beating Freo. They don't want teams not to be winning matches.
And just in terms of loading, are we out of the loading period, or because we've had a long break between the Geelong game and then the GWS game, do you think we'll be doing another block of loading this week?
I mean, that's where it's complete guesswork. So we know that they do it. We don't know. We think about 3 weeks. We don't know the phase, but my assumption would be they've got a bit more to go. And I'm hoping tapering into the Giants game, and we'll see. We'll see within 10 minutes where we're at. If you're watching the Suns game today, they were running on top of the ground, in a completely different way. If we see that at Alice Springs, we'll know that they've tapered into that. So my suspicion is they've still got a ways to go. Hopefully they'll freshen up ahead of the Giants game.
The Giants will be coming off a bye, so that's a tick in our favour. DZ says, just wondering if you guys have any ideas as to why we haven't played Cozzy in the midfield since he performed so well there in the preseason and round 1. I feel he's better suited running onto the ball and into the forward line rather than having it kicked on top of his head in a one-on-one contest. I've been saying this all season, because I've said just put Cozzy in the guts for a few minutes here or there to get him into the match. And the only thing I was having a think about it today, and the only thing I could think of that perhaps he wasn't doing what was asked of him in the stints in the middle, and as a result he's been banished back to the forward line. But that's just a wild guess from me. George, any thoughts on why Cozzy's not being thrown into the middle? I'm not sure if he's not fit enough or what to play that role, or why.
It's a difficult question. It certainly looked impressive from a fan's point of view when he was in there, but just as equally, he was only in there for very short periods of time, if I recall, during the pre-season. It was one ball up or something like that, and then he'd be moved out. It's easy to forget that, what is he now, 20 years of age, and you don't want a talented player like that spending too much time in the midfield, because it is a tough, hard gig inside there. They haven't done it during the season. It's surprising. I would expect that he's very, very useful as a shock troop, but also the other thing in the midfield is you just can't be attacking only. There's three opposition players in there as well that have to be accounted for, and the ball doesn't always bounce your way. And when it doesn't, you've got to be able to defend to stop the easy exits. If he's not doing that or is inexperienced in those matters, then why would you put him back in there again? But I think we'll see over the years, the same as we saw Cyril Rioli in particular, being used as a shock troop in certain circumstances, in certain games. He's got the ability there. So it'll be interesting to see. But, we as fans would like to see him in there doing more. We as fans would like to see him dancing around the forward line the way he does, kicking goals. But footy's a pretty tough, hard game, and you can't expect it all the time.
They used him at the beginning of 21 for a few games at the very beginning of the season, and again last year and again this year. So it seemed maybe that's when he's freshest, he didn't. It's been a while since he's been in. The centre bounce attendances in this match were really...
I was going to ask that. Are we seeing more players get rolled through the midfield?
We have generally. In this particular match, it was interesting. So 20 centre bounce attendances by Jack Viney, 20 by Track, 15 by Maxi, 13 by Gus, 12 by Sparrow, only 8 by Grundy. And Grundy only rucked 40% of the time for the night. But keeping in mind, he was off the field for nearly 15 minutes in 20 minutes. They did a concussion test on him, which was a really big factor, I reckon, that sort of didn't get commented on much at the time. What's really interesting about this, and then below that, James Jordan had 3. Trent Rivers had 1 on the night against the Cats, and Cozzy none.
So we've stopped.
What's really interesting...
We've stopped rolling. It seems to have stopped rolling multiple players through.
In the same way, yeah. So again, I think about once if you think about the first third of the season, that's what to think about for the last third of the season. And then we're more likely to use players because the players are fresher and can do that sort of running through the middle. You don't want to gas Cozzy if he's got nothing in the tank and you want him up forward. And just on the criticism of our forward pressure, we had... I just saw before our forward half tackles, I think it was like plus 15 differential our way, inside 50 tackles. So that was pretty impressive, actually. Our forward pressure was really good against the Cats. What was really interesting about the centre bounce attendance percentages is Viney's was in 87% of all centre bounces, so was Track, both 87% of all centre bounces for the night. And their season average is 68% for Jack Viney and 65% for Track. And I know Oliver's not in the team, but still that's a significantly more centre time than those two players normally do. And, of course, their most sort of tough and hardened senior players are playing now in the centre.
So the theory, George, the theory early on in the year was to roll more people through the middle, to give Viney and to give Oliver and to give Track a chop out so that they'd be fresher later in the year. So it seems like we're not putting...
in match. In match.
So we're not rolling those players through now because we don't want to gas the Rivers, the Cozzys, the Jordans. Exactly. But then is that going to gas the Bulls?
Yeah, gas the Bulls, exactly.
Yeah, and the absence of Oliver is critical because you still need a bull of some sort inside, and so you've got to give more time to people like Sparrow over a Cozzy. For the long term sort of thing. That's just not just for long term, but for the game itself. So you won't have the same sort of opportunity. And let's face it, unfortunately, injuries do occur. And if you're managing to put experience and time and into people like Sparrow and even Rivers, you're building something for the future.
And on Sparrow, it's amazing. He was at 52% of the centre bounce attendances for this match, which seemed high to me, but then his season average so far is 47.8. So he's been in a lot of centre bounces, Captain Jack. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's, we'll see as we get closer to the season. But you don't want – I mean, it's easy to forget, like George said, because he's just a kid. Trent Rivers is not that much older. Do you really want them to be smashed in the midfield in the middle of the season?
No, and I guess when we're asking for Cozzy to get more midfield minutes, it's the minute or two here or there. It's not for big chunks of the game. It's to get him into the game, really. Sometimes if he's struggling up forward to get touches, sometimes bringing a guy like that into the midfield can get them into the game, get him a few touches. But, yeah, you got to be, as George said, you got to be mindful of they've got to mind someone as well, and you don't want opposition to get off the chain. AF says, we know the coaching team have a philosophy of backing in our system, but they've shown with their use of a defensive forward, previously Melksham and more recently Smith, and at times in 2021, a negating mid in harms to both Libba and Lachie Neale. We are prepared to use negative roles to ensure our system functions optimally. Do you think we should be more willing to use more negating players in our system? And I guess, like, with the exception of a few examples that, who was it? AF mentioned, Melksham and Smith and Harms on one or two occasions. Goody, and we've said it before, Goody doesn't employ a negating style of play, and I doubt we're going to see that anytime soon. We might see it up forward on occasions, like we saw with, what we did with Darcy Moore, and how we've used Melksham sometimes in the past, and B-Man, we're not really a tagging team, are we?
No, I mean, it was interesting because they did try that in this match, really, with Smith on Stewart. I mean, I thought Smith played. I mean, he was good, but Stewart is like so important to the way they play footy, and he's excellent, isn't he? He's a really, although speaking, it was Stewart who pushed Jack Viney afterwards.
Yeah, that was a dog act.
Yeah, come on, that's like that. But yeah, he's so important. I mean, I think we're all in for the negating forward. I mean, it makes sense if like same with the Lear when we play Port, you want to minimise their impact. I think that's more the minimising the impact. But I don't think many teams are really running any hard tags anymore. They've gone from footy almost, haven't they, George?
Petrarca had a pretty hard tag on him. Blitzarves was wearing him like a gloves, dragging him. They definitely went in with a plan. We don't do stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm not saying we should, but we don't do that anymore. Sometimes I think we should, but...
and I'll touch on that when I talk about the umpiring, but yeah. So...
do you want to talk about the umpiring now? I sort of put it I didn't put it on our run sheet, but I had marked it on my sheet at the end. So if you want it, we're finished with the questions. We're going to go to Casey. If you want to talk about the umpiring, talk about it now.
George, did you just want to make a point on that last one?
Yeah. It was just in the absence of Oliver. It gave Geelong the opportunity to take the next best one in Petrarca out by putting Atkins in particular. I think was spending an awful lot of time annoying him for the whole game.
Yeah.
But most clubs and coaches have worked out that negating players isn't a statistical advantage to you in the long run, because you almost lose a player within the game. And the sad part is if you're negating, you've got to provide something at some stage. It's not just shutting someone down. You've got to be able to get your own ball as well. And there's not many players to do that. And when people bring up the example of Harms, I go, when was that?
It's 2018. Or 2021, he did it in one game.
Goody's made the point a number of times. In fact, in the commentary of this game, this point was made as well, is that one of the real negatives of tagging is that means that player can be taken away from the contest. So you can choose to take an opponent away from the contest. And in one of the set plays, they said that's what Track did. He brought his opponent on the offensive side of the contest to back himself to win it, and took his opponent away from the contest. So I it's funny, isn't it? We haven't talked about Oliver at all. I mean, he was a massive, massive out in those conditions. He would have just been like that's the conditions that would be drawn up for Oliver every day of the week. That game would have looked completely different if Oliver was playing.
Yeah, and I would be fine for what they did to Petrarca if we had Oliver in there, because I'd just say, all right, we'll take Petrarca out and let Oliver do whatever
That's right. That's right. If we had Oliver in there, then Petrarca could have gone up forward and taken his tag away from him, and they have to choose whether to stay with Oliver. But the Oliver situation's a real worry in terms of, if his hammy's not right, and we need him in our best 22, and we need him quick. We've really, really missed him. We beat Collingwood, obviously, so that was super impressive. But it's interesting how little talk there's been even on Demonland in the media about how much we missed Oliver in Thursday night's game. He just would have those conditions would have been perfect for him.
Speaking of hammies, I think Andy's done one at the moment.
Yeah, I've had to get up a few times because I've been sitting all day and I've had to stretch.
So on the umpires, I wanted to say it's a catch-22 because, one of the real challenges in football is getting, and any sport, any team sport, at the junior level, amateur level, right across all the levels, is getting people umpiring it. I spent, like George, a lot of years coaching junior basketball teams. Both my kids played basketball. Was on a basketball committee. It was the bane of our life, organising with the basketball centre, getting constantly a flow of young refs in, and there's all these rules about you're not abusing young kids, and the amount of ridiculous criticism young kids get. Even at amateur basketball, junior basketball level, you would have heard everything, wouldn't you? I mean, it's god awful. Some of it. It's unbelievable. So, I don't want to be critical at all of the umpires because it's a really hard job. On top of that, my son was a referee, pretty high level basketball referee, and the amount of stuff he copped is ridiculous. But the AFL, I think, are being really disingenuous with this. Is that they've created this environment where it's wrong to criticise the individual umpires, and I totally agree with that. Like, I'm not critical of the standard of umpiring because of the umpires. I'm critical of the standard of umpiring because of the AFL. The AFL are actively not addressing this issue. They're doing two things. One, for me, the only way forward is to have a level of professionalism, whether that's one or two fully senior umpires in every game that are full-time professionals. Outside of doing the matches, they do things like umpire at AFLW or mentoring, or they go out to the local leagues and run umpiring sessions or community development outreach, whatever it is, to get the very, very best decision makers making decisions. Secondly, what the AFL need to do is to stop mucking around with the rules. Everyone talks about how difficult the game is to umpire. It's the hardest game in the world to umpire. It's 360 degrees. It's ballistic. The ball is moving quick. Well, take active steps to take as much grey out of the rules as possible. Like, for instance, we were talking last week, it's a joke putting umpires in the situation to make a subjective decision about whether a player had an intent to keep the ball in or not. Just make it last touch like the AFLW between the two arcs. That would help. That would take the pressure off the umpiring. It really frustrates me because this game, watching it not live at the ground, so we've talked about how different that experience is when you watch a game for the first time live on television as opposed to it at the ground. It seems like there's a clear agreement from the broadcasters not to be critical of umpires during the game or not even comment on really poor decisions. What really frustrates me is this isn't supposedly the most elite competition for Australian rules in the country. And it's the top of the top of the triangle in terms of a sport in Australia, really. And we are having games of football decided on mistakes. And this game was, so I'm not being critical of the umpires here who I don't even know who umpired this game. I never look. I never know anyone probably except Razor Ray because he talks so much on the coverage. But this was appalling. The umpire in this match was appalling. I don't care what people say. It impacted the result. This absolutely impacted the result. So taking the emotion out of it, I watched the Collingwood the Pies-Crows game today. It was worst umpiring. There's no question I don't care about who won that match. There's no question in my mind that the Crows would have won that game if they even had a half decent crack at it. So decisions like the one that Chandler didn't get that goal in a close game where we're struggling to score, and they advantage rule, which is another joke rule. It's a complete joke rule that the AFL could do something about it to make it easier for the umpire. So in that scenario, when advantage was called, Chandler didn't even have time to.
It was called after. It was called after.
He did. he kicked the goal
point.
and he missed it. He should have kicked it. He was only 15 metres out. But every day of the week that should have got called back. Now, two things there. It was a shocking decision, a really bad decision. And add that up to the number of ones that weren't paid. And in particular, the scragging that Track got. It was ridiculous. How often do you see Track get demonstrative? 5-6 times in that match, he was putting his hands up to the umpire to say, what is happening? And not once, I think. He
got one. Oh, yeah.
No. Only once was it mentioned on the thing. And then there was another example where Gawn got blocked out of a contest, ended up on the ground with his arms in the air, beseeching the umpire. It's just not good enough. And again, I'm not blaming the individual umpires, but the AFL of creating this environment where they let themselves off the hook, because it's not the individual umpire's fault. It's the AFL's responsibility. They are the ones. They're responsible for shepherding the game forward. They're responsible for all aspects of it. Yet they spend millions and millions of dollars. A joke on who cares about the snickometer on a pole. Get the umpiring right before you worry about going to the video thing, whether it's touched on the line. Umpiring impacts the game much, 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 much more than whether the ball shaves the post and it was 1 point, not 5 points. It's just something that needs to be sorted if it wants to be a truly, properly elite competition. You cannot have so many games that are so poorly umpired, and it was infuriating, this game. The umpiring was absolutely appalling, and I don't need to look at anything beyond the statistics about the statistical advantage home teams, in particular at the Optus Oval, Adelaide Oval, and the Gabba and Cardinia Park, how visiting teams don't get as many free kicks. Now, over many, many years, that's held true. Now, you hear about the noise of affirmation. I mean, that should not come into it. It just should not come into it, but all of the data shows it does. It just is not good enough. And this game was appallingly umpired, and we were on the wrong end of it. And in particular, that non-decision from Chandler. So it was a bad decision, should have been called back. As an example of why it's the AFL's fault, sort that rule out. Sort the rule out. Don't blow the whistle, or give it bring it back, or take that to video replay. They can do that, the AFL, and don't sort it out in the middle of the season. Don't change the rules in the middle of the season. Do it at the end of the season.
If they're going to, George, will get to you in a sec, if they're going to rule intent when players kick out, and kick it out, which I think is a ridiculous rule as it is, they can surely call back that wasn't an advantage. I called advantage.
Of course,
I might have called it earlier. No, they don't even need to take it to a video. If they can just say that wasn't advantage.
But they do it all the time. They actually bring it back. In fact,
they do bring it back all the time.
Well, there was an example in another game, I can't remember the game, where the player definitely took advantage and then scrubbed the kick on the full when they brought it back. I mean, it's just not good enough.
George?
My problem is around the intent or the interpretations that the umpires are required to do. In that Chandler situation, if that was in a rugby union game, the referee would put his hand up to indicate that an advantage has occurred, and then would look at the outcome to see whether there was a genuine advantage there. Rugby union can do it, so AFL can do the same thing. Don't blow the whistle. Put your hand up and to indicate it. The other thing with...
Or get rid of the rule altogether.
Yeah. Well, yes, yeah. But it's taking away the interpretation for the umpire. Was that an advantage or not?
Well, they call advantage to let the other players know the play's going on so they don't just stop.
Yeah, but like in union, the referee puts his hand up. He doesn't blow the whistle.
Same in soccer.
Yeah.
Same in soccer.
Yeah.
So and then that guarantees actually is an advantage. Half the time with the advantage rule, for example, that it turns into a massive advantage because the team not with the ball completely stops, and suddenly they're not manned up. But again, it's the AFL could take that grey out immediately. For instance, by just getting rid of the rule, or not blowing the whistle. Simple.
Right. And the other, I watched the St Kilda Richmond game last week, which was played in two halves, where it absolutely poured down in the second half of the game. In the first half of the game, anything that came off the side of the boot was determined to be insufficient intent. And in the second half, when it was raining, nothing was paid because it was wet. That's not what the rule says. It's as simple as that. So make it easy for the umpire. Whatever.
Exactly.
And what we've got is a ridiculous situation at the moment where no matter what the intent or what the outcome, if the ball goes out of bounds halfway, but anywhere on the ground, half the crowd is going to yell for a insufficient intent, and the other half will be disappointed. So every time it goes out of bounds, the umpire is under pressure, and it's just ridiculous. Do what you've already got a rule in the AFLW. It works. Everybody understands it. It's nice and easy. There's no pressure on the umpires because it's straightforward. You know, if you've kicked it or handballed it out, then it's a free kick to the opposition. We've already got out of bounds on the full. Everybody understands it. People don't complain. The crowd don't complain when the ball's kicked out of bounds on the full because they know the rules.
And so much of that grey is the AFL's choice. Even this stuff around the sling tackles and the head high. It's a function. That is all a function of the AFL's policy decision to want a faster, quicker game. And so they're allowing players heaps of time to get rid of the ball. 25 years ago, players were given no time. Blow the whistle. This was a response. We don't want so many free kicks. Well, we're just making the job of umpires harder. If you acknowledge it's a hard job, the AFL is actively making it harder.
So Fritsch got done for a sling tackle during the game, which was then deemed not to be a suspendable offence. But so then does that mean it should have been dropping the ball?
It is a super tough game. They've got to run. I mean, like as I said, it's a hard job. You don't want to. I just think the AFL use this. Don't criticise the umpire because it's going to impact junior football as a fig leaf for what they can fix. And on top of that, my conspiracy theory vibe in me says, well, they actually don't mind all of the argument. They don't mind all of the debate because it fills up television shows and radio shows, and while people debate about the sling tackle.
All right, let's move on to Casey. Casey rocked up at GMHBA Stadium 24 hours after their AFL counterparts, and instead of capitulating, they handed the Cats a 40-point defeat. Jake Melksham booted 4 goals from 14 disposals and 6 marks. Brent Brown kicked 2 goals, 1 from 18 disposals and 9 marks. Josh Shackey, 2 goals, 2 from 15 disposals, 5 marks. Adam Tomlinson had a point to make to the senior match committee and made it well, dominating possession with 27 disposals and 9 marks. Charlie Spargo had 20 possessions. Bowie, 27. Daniel Turner, 20. Both were impressive. Taj Woden, 21, had his moments. George, you watched the entire game. What were your impressions from game 2.0 at the Cattery?
Yeah, it was a really interesting game. There were 9 ins this week into the side from the last played, including 8 AFL listed players. So it was really interesting. What was also interesting was how unfatigued we were. It wasn't played in the wet, this particular game, and we absolutely blew them away. Certainly in the first half, we were 40 points up at three-quarter time. At halftime, stopped for the third quarter, and then came back and blew them away again in the final quarter. So they weren't running out of legs by any stretch. The really impressive players for me were Turner in particular. He had 11 marks up to halftime and finished the game with 14. He was in everything. Tomlinson's statistics look good. He had 9 marks, but 27 disposals. But you've also got to take into account that he had 9 kick-outs out of that, so they're getting stats for that sort of thing these days. Turner, 18 kicks, 27 disposals, I think he was. Ben Brown was fantastic as well. Absolute. He hasn't played a game like that for quite a while. He was moving up the ground, moving freely. He had 8 marks to half-time, 9 in total for the game. I think they took him off for a fair bit of the third quarter and brought him back on. He had 2 goals before half-time, gave away a couple more. He was everything that we wanted in Ben Brown, certainly in the seniors side. So that was good to watch. Melksham got 4 goals, but they were the usual Melksham goals out the back. not doing a particularly great amount of work up the field. It was interesting. Verrill, for the first time, was playing in the ruck. He's 199 centimetres, I think, and 97 kilos with 23 hitouts in the game for his first crack at ruck. So he'll be there for a while learning his craft, but he looked very promising. Well, we had 21 disposals, but unfortunately it disappears during the game. But again, he's a young player. You don't expect that. Howes and Jefferson did very, very little during the game. But again, because they're young first-year players, it's not surprising. Harms had 27 disposals. That was a typical Harms games. He'd been there being a grunt player, and then he'd get some fantastic possessions, and then he'd kick it straight to the opposition. But the other one who was really impressive to me, and I think we'll see him back next week, is Bowie. 27 possessions, and they were all over the place. They weren't just sitting on the half-back line. He was up in the middle. He was in absolutely everything. 12 marks, 5 tackles. He just had the ball on an absolute string. So I think we'll see Bowie back next week. I'd like to see Ben Brown next week because he was providing that tall target, bringing the ball to ground, but he's also marking the ball. So and he seemed to be running freely, which he certainly hasn't been from what we've seen in the first half of the season. Shaki, as the commentators or one of the, I can't remember who said, it was Shaki's whole game is summed up by almost. And this was his 49th VFL game, and I think that tells you where Shaki sits.
All right, well, let's move on to changes. Clayton Oliver's missed the past 4 matches. It's been 5 weeks since his hamstring injury, and we definitely need that class back. Radelaide asked, if Clary is back this week, do you think we might manage Viney 2 weeks in a row? He is clutched at that same shoulder. Big Mac Jr. adds, main concern is Viney was at the same shoulder, hoping Oliver can come back in next week and possibly look to manage Viney so he can heal. He is incredibly important to our finals chances, but won't be very effective if he has a serious injury he's carrying each week from now on. So, big man, we've seen Viney clutch at that right shoulder 2 matches in a row. He's had to leave the field to have it attended to. In both games, he was able to come back, but clearly something's NQR about it. If Clary's back, and it's probably even still a big if, that might, can we afford to give Viney a chop out, considering the criticism last year on the footy department was not managing niggles and not managing them effectively, if at all, during the year last year. This would certainly classify as a niggle, unless there's some structural damage. So what do you think about giving Viney a chop out if Clayton is available to play?
Yeah, it's impossible to know, isn't it? Because, I mean, my assumption is that they would never put him on the field if there's any risk of him being injured. So, like, I don't know, I have no idea what that would be, but it looked even worse this week than last week, didn't it? I thought he'd done his shoulder for sure. It must be, I don't know, some nerve, who knows what it is, I'd just be guessing. So, I don't think he needs a chop out unless he's likely to do his, injure him or doing it. If there was any risk of that causing any injury, absolutely, I would say don't play him.
Because it wasn't even like an impact thing this week. It was he was sort of tackling, so he was just sort of moving his. He wasn't even have the arms around.
Impact. Yeah.
It was a classic situation where somebody pops their shoulder, but it might have popped straight back in.
Yeah. So
interestingly, they didn't strap it afterwards, which you normally do if that's happened.
Yeah. So I don't think they will rest him, put it that way. So I'm not sure whether they should or they shouldn't manage. I mean, if he's got a niggle that's going to be made worse by playing footy, then I'd hope they don't play him, to be honest. That would be my take on that.
Pew 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 says, selection will be interesting this week. If Petty returns as a permanent forward this week against the Giants, will the D's bring back Adam Tomlinson into the side after he was unceremoniously dumped after the King's birthday showing, so that we are able to retain the 3 genuine tools in defence? Then Pew 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 added, or could we see Ben Brown make a triumphant return after a good showing in the Chews? So, George, I guess the big question is what to do about our forward line. If Petty does return to the forward line, do we bring Tomlinson back in to give us those 3 genuine tools down back? You can answer that one first and then talk about whether Ben Brown makes his triumphant return to the side.
I think the answer to both is yes, both are possible. I was really impressed with Turner, though, as well. That I'd almost bring Turner in as an opportunity this week. If Petty's moved forward, you need someone that's either Tomlinson or Turner. There's no one else there at the moment who's pushing for the positions. Yes, Ben Brown, from what I saw in this Casey game, is well and truly ready to come back into the forward line. You don't know the numbers that he's producing or whether that's what the coaches want at the moment or the fitness people or whether they're going to leave him for another week. But I think Petty going into the forward line is absolutely needed. The question becomes,
if Ben Brown does come in, does Petty move?
What do you do with
Petty,
what do you do with Joel
Smith? First
Smith?
of all, forget Joel Smith for the second. If Ben Brown comes in, Petty stays down back. Assuming
no, not necessarily.
No,
I think Petty can stay in, and like I said, I think we're playing one too many smalls because up to this point we haven't had the talls.
Yeah.
And the next question is, does JVR
that's
due for a cutout?
Yeah.
Because you can't expect a 19-year-old to play. We didn't ever expect him to play for the whole season. Is this the time that you give him a break?
No, but the hope was to have the Ben Browns, to have the Tom McDonalds in alongside him, and then you can bring him in and out as needed. Give him the third best tall or the second best tall rather than taking the first best tall as he's been taken.
Yeah. So it's going to be a difficult decision because, fortunately, we've got a couple of options, I think, this week.
Then we've got Kiwi D says, do you think Jake Bowie will return to the team this week? I reckon he was back to his best footy pre-concussion. So, big man, does Bowie return to the back line to give us another elite kick out of defence? And I guess if the answer is yes, based on his form in the twos, who's going to come out to replace him?
Well, I like last week, I reckon this is really another fascinating selection week for me, and for a couple of reasons. One, for all of the mystery of who's going to come in and who's going to go out, but more from a point of view of what it tells us about, one, this match, and two, what it might look like. Because I think now we're going to be moving into, my prediction for this game is that we'll smash them.
All right, we'll get to your preview in a second. We're talking changes.
And, I'm really, really interested to hear, because I've thought all season that they're basically trying to get Ben Brown right for the back end of the season. So if they play him, he will be right. And I'm really, really interested to hear George's take on particularly how well you're saying he moved George, because that's the key, isn't it? It's his mobility is the issue, not his ability to clunk some marks or kick straight. So based on that, I would think there's a very, very good chance that they'll bring Brown in. And if they do, I think that's a real signal that, if he's selected Thursday night, that's to me a real signal that we're chips in for this match, and that we're going to come out firing. And I think Bowie's definitely best 22, isn't he? So he comes back in too. Who comes out? This is a really, it's a really interesting time of year. I reckon Jordan will get dropped. Maybe he goes back to the bench. That's one. Did we have any injuries come out of it?
Not yet.
No.
It's still early for that mystery injury of the week.
It doesn't sound like, really, just from the way they're talking, it's very mysterious, but it doesn't sound like Oliver's going to play, would be my guess. It just sounds like he's not going to play from, it's gone from, he'll definitely to it's a week at a time type thing, which is making me slightly sick in the stomach if his hammy's not right. So if it's the two players coming in, who comes out, maybe Smith, that would be tough on him. It all depends a little bit on that question about, does Petty go forward or does he pay back?
I'll ask you, if Ben Brown does come in and Smith's there, does Petty stay down defence? Does he go to forward and then bring in Tomlinson? Or
if Petty goes forward, Smith and Ben Brown's in the team, Smith, there's no spot for Smith. And I don't think anyone's keen for Smith to go back. So,
no.
I think that if Petty goes forward, it'll be at the expense of Smith. It'd be tough on Smith. Yeah. He was our best player for half of that game, wasn't he? He kicked our first couple of goals, or at least our first goal.
And should have kicked another one, that big snap that he did that just...
And should have kicked another one and missed the set shot as well. So he could have had a day out. So it depends a little bit. A lot hinges on Ben Brown, because Smithy is sort of gives the height of a Ben Brown, but also can play defensive forward like Melksham has done. So, I've always thought Petty would go back, but then that's been proven wrong to the week that I thought that he would play forward. So
the other question is this a week that with Hibbo, do you give him a week off again? He seems to be a week in, week out sort of scenario, and that creates the opportunity for Bowie. And like I said, Bowie was just magnificent in this Casey game. The only reason he was playing down there was subsequent to the concussion problems. So
we can talk about Hibbert in a second because there might be a question related to that. Okay. Let's get into the preview.
Just before you do, Andy, I'd say Gus played a much better game. I thought he was terrific in the first half, in particular, and his attack on the ball. And so kudos to Gus because I thought he wasn't as good the previous week.
The Giants are coming off the dreaded bye that has claimed, I think, 8 victims, or was it 10 now? Is it 10 victims?
Well, every team except for the Saints and the Pies have lost after the bye, but the Saints and the Pies played
other teams. So it's basically affected any team coming off the bye.
Yeah,
effectively. They've had an up and down season to date, having only won the 6 matches and lost the 8. They're the only team to have lost to the Eagles this season, but they did take the scalp of the Cats at the Cattery early in the season, and in their last outing thumped the Dockers by 70 points, who were running in lead boots. They're a hard one to get a read on. They have a lot of talent in the side, but they're a model of inconsistency. They'll be missing the very talented Lachie Whitfield, who's out suspended. Perhaps Nick Haynes, who suffered an ankle injury, but he's had the week off. And former Demon Jesse Hogan was out with a calf injury. Both are still listed as TBC, so they both could still play. Skrull says, thanks for the shout out on last week's show. I have a question for our upcoming game against the Giants. Toby Green often causes us some headaches. Who do you see as the ideal matchup for him? Hibbard, ? McVee, ? So Toby Green, he can be troublesome. He's arguably the best small forward in the league. Looking at his stats, he only averages a goal a game against us. But having said that, the last 2 times he has played against us, he didn't play last year's thump where we thumped them. But in 2021, he kicked 5 goals 2 and then 3 goals straight against us. So he's got most of his goals against us the last 2 times he's played. So, George, one of the big questions when we look at matchups against the Giants is who's going to take the irrepressible Toby Green?
I think that's the problem. He's irrepressible. Toby Green is such a brilliant footballer. There is no real matchup for him as such. You've got to play as a team to try and stop him. You've got to back up your fellow players in those circumstances, be it in the air or on the ground. He is just one-on-one. He is absolutely unbeatable, and so you can't say, "Oh, Hibbo will go and let you play on him." It's got to be a combination effort from everybody. The good thing is that the Giants are exactly what you described then, Andy. They are a week-to-week proposition. They're sometimes irrepressible, and the following week they're as flat as a tack. Let's hope that that's the case when they go to Alice Springs against us this week.
No one ever seems to be flat as a tack when they come up against us.
You've got your MFCSS back again, haven't you?
Oh, yeah.
But they're on the upward scale. They're playing really good footy. Giants, they're good to watch. They're moving the ball quick off the halfback flank. They're really, one of the things that works out well for this game, if they continue to attack and play their style of footy, and particularly they're coming off the bye, it will create a fast running open game. And if we are running on top of the ground, they'll stick to their plan, and so you'll see a high scoring game. And if it ends up being a running game and we are fresh, we'll really get on top. On Toby Green, he is a star, isn't he? He averages 3 goals per game this season and tick over a goal assist per game. So he's the other player for them who's just awesome footballer is Tom Green. He's averaging nearly 6.5 clearances per game. You mentioned Lachie Whitfield. He's a great out. He's averaging 6. He's their highest average kick winner. And Nick Haynes you mentioned as well. He's the average. He's their biggest average mark. He takes 8 marks a game, so he's a big out for them as well. They've got a lot of positives. Giants are on the up. I want the Suns and the Giants both to be successful because it's good for footy. But defensively, they've got a good combination of offense and defense. They're number 1 for tackles inside 50. which is really impressive for a team that's mid-table. They're 5th in score involvements per game. They're 4th in centre clearances per game, which is really impressive again for a mid-side table. 5th in effective disposals. They've got a lot of good kicks. They move the ball well. They're 2nd in handball, so they're really using that sort of. Hawthorn is doing it as well with lots of handballs and creating that running game. And one of the stats that was really interesting, I thought, was they're 5th for inside 50s per game. So they're playing a territory game, which is the template at the moment, but they're doing it with fast ball movement. I hope Jesse Hogan does play. He's one of my favourite Ds. I love watching him play, but it would be beneficial for us if he doesn't, obviously. Toby Green, Hibbo probably does he's probably the only one of those players who's a sort of similar height who's going to be strong enough. But as George says, you've just got an all-team defence and accept that he's probably going to get, if you can keep him under 3 goals, I think job well done for Toby Green. I'd say he's probably the top 2 or 3 players in the AFL. He's just a total out-and-out star. I really like watching the Giants play. I'm really, really looking forward to this match, and I predict we'll absolutely smash them.
Have you looked at the weather forecast, as we like to do on this program? It's interesting.
No, I thought I'd leave that with you, Andy. I'm hoping dry conditions in the Alice, but not slippery, not dewy, not...
It's strange because tomorrow being Monday, so we're broadcasting tonight on a Sunday. We usually do Monday, but so tomorrow, Monday, it will be Monday, 26 degrees. It says cloudy, but 26 degrees. Then the next few days are like 50% chance of rain, 80% chance of rain. Friday and Saturday, 70% chance. It doesn't have any percent chance of rain on the Sunday when we're playing them, but it's 10 degrees. So from 26 on Monday to 10 degrees on Sunday when we're playing them. That's the high. 4 degrees. 4 degrees low, 10 degrees high.
In Alice Springs.
In Alice Springs. So it's going to be a cold,
Only to
cold
Melbourne.
day.
Only Melbourne could go to Alice Springs and play in the wet weather.
It's going to be
degrees.
Colder. What's in Melbourne on that day? I bet you it's sunny and something. Sunday's 14 in Melbourne.
The good thing for us is that the game's at 3:20 in the afternoon as far as the weather's concerned, whereas the traditional night game, it gets very slippery afterwards and turns it into a bit of a slogfest. So even if it's 10 degrees, the players will probably appreciate it, as long as it's not wet. And the ground won't be wet by that stage, even if it's rained the previous other days. It should be a good condition for a great game of footy.
Sunday's low will be 4 degrees between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. and the high will be 10 degrees between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. Precipitation, there might be some rain at like 12 a.m., but it looks clear for the rest of the day.
Just on the Giants, Andy, I was going to say that like this thing, our issues with handling the ball is, I've watched the Giants a bit this year. As I say, I like watching them play. They've still stacked with top-end draft picks. They've still got a lot of really high-end players, and you can see their skill individually. Their skill, like super skilled players like Canidio, as I mentioned, Tom Green, Haynes,
Kelly,
Green. We mentioned Lockie Whitfield.
Josh Kelly.
The player who should have come to Melbourne or could have come to Melbourne instead of Salo?
Kelly,
beautiful football. They've got a lot of really high-skilled, individually high-skilled players who are one-touch players. When you think about our list, we've got a great system and we've got an excellent depth of quality, but we haven't got really that many top 10 players in that. Maybe we've 4 or 5 top 10 players.
Yeah, Gus, Track, Salo.
Oliver, Cozzy. Yeah. So 4 or 5. The Giants have got 8, 9, 10 top, at least first round draft picks. And the point I'm trying to make is that, the top end players are the ones who like Butters and Rosie. They're the ones who are most likely to handle the ball, be one touch players, because that's why they've gone high in the draft often. So, we've got a lot of mid-table players who play really well in our system in a role, but maybe haven't got that top end skill that would have pushed them up into the first round of the draft.
All right. Well, I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next week, hopefully discussing a return to the winners list. If you want to listen to the show live then, and please head on over to demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, Jarek, Wodger the First, and Jono. Thank you to our voicemailer, Anonymous. Now you are salty.
Sticky. Oh, salty.
I don't feel out of it because all of us use false names.
That's right. That's why I said you don't have to use your real name. Just call yourself salty.
Before you go any further, Andy, what's your prediction for the match? And George, what's your prediction for the match?
Look, I thought we'd actually beat Geelong, believe it or not. And I think we'll win this match, but I know we're Melbourne and we could just as well get a hiding. Like
That's
we
not
did.
a prediction.
Will
we win it?
I think we should. We should win it.
No, it's still not a prediction.
All right, well, we're going to win
Will
it.
we win it?
We will win it. We've got more options this week, both down, back, and up forward that we didn't have going into the Geelong game. The conditions should be good for us to play, which is exactly suits our style of play more than anything else. So, the Giants are very, very talented by foot and hand. They are just first class. Yeah. But
so pressure will be.
Yeah, as a friend of mine said, the trouble with the Giants, and the Suns used to be the same problem. You've got to play as a team as well, and
but they're getting there. They're playing.
They're getting,
I reckon
they're getting there, but they're not at a position. Their ladder position below is exactly what they are as a team. They're stacked to the hilt with talented players, but they're not producing what that type of list should be producing. It's
no, but they're building. I think they're building to what they've got the fundamentals and got that team energy. They're heading in the right direction. I reckon. So.
Well, they're building, but let's hope they've got a rostered day off on Sunday. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Sam6172, Bobo, Surfer D, Monocular, Big Mac Jr., Red Jacket, Bigfoot, At the Break of Gorn, Watson 11, Singer, Redlegs 23, Lazy, D-Minion, Males, DZ, AF, Radelaide, Pew Pew Pew, Kiwi D, and Skrull. And thank you to my co-hosts, George and Bimman. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts, and we'll read them out on the next show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Relegers.
This